All right, Beau Johnson, welcome back to the Think Wise podcast. We loved having you the first time, had an amazing conversation, so figured we'd bring you back and probably will be bringing you back more in the future.
Thanks, guys.
How you doing today?
Man, doing excellent. Thanks for asking. I had to have my blood drawn this morning, so I was feeling a little lightheaded, but I got a strawberry smoothie. I got
Nice.
two guys I'm excited to talk to. Let's do this.
Ready to go. Yeah, so we'll just get started. So I want to talk about in your last two jobs, you have found a way to really serve people who are regarded as somewhat celebrity leaders, people who have big followings, and Andy Stanley and Patrick Lencioni. And so first off, right off the bat, I want to ask you, one, how did you find yourself in these positions? And what overall lessons have you learned from working with such high profile leaders?
Okay, really interesting question. So I did know that I was going to work for two high profile people, and I would say I was a pretty big fan of both of them. I don't know that I was a fanboy. Maybe people would say otherwise. But I really wanted to go work for them because I wanted to go to school. I wanted to go learn. I was working in an environment, in a church environment, and really realized I have so much to learn about leadership and church and what that looks like. So when the opportunity came up to go work for Andy, Andy Stanley leads what at one point was the largest church in the United States. I was like, man, this is an opportunity to go back to school and just to get to go learn. And I got this advice years ago from a civil engineer who said, everybody is looking for jobs the wrong way. They're looking for a job based on what's their income going to be or what's their title going to be or what are they going to do. And he said, you should pick your job based on what you want to go learn. And when you do that, when you step into a new job with like the curiosity of what am I going to get to go explore? What skill am I going to get to sharpen? First of all, you love the job more because every day is a school day. And if you see part of the purpose of what you're doing is just to go get sharpened, then there's infinite opportunity wherever you go. And then I think underneath your question, Christian, is like, how did I get that job? Is that true? Like, how did I end up getting a job to work for Andy Stanley and getting a job to work for Pat Lencioni? Which that's really interesting. I didn't think about that in advance of this time. So, but I'll reflect on it and then I'd love to hear what you think about it. Life is often compared to being a marathon, but I've always resonated with this quote from Michael Johnson. Did we talk about this on the last episode? I love this quote. I talk about it all the time, which is, he said, Michael Johnson was an Olympic sprinter. He ran the 200 and the 400 meters, won gold in both in 1996 in Atlanta at the Olympics. And he said, life is often compared to a marathon, but I think it's much closer to being a sprint. And here's what a sprint is. Long periods of training with brief opportunities to perform at your best. You resonate with that? You're kind of in the middle distance guy, but yeah, isn't that really what life is? Is like train, race.
Definitely.
It's not actually.
I was going to say, even for longer races, it's like you're training 90 to 100 miles a week for a 6-mile race. And
so in general, I feel like if I had if our family had like a catchphrase, it would be half a life is showing up. And sometimes my parents gave me this advice at one point. They're like, when you're new at something, you need to say yes to every opportunity for a year. Just say yes, just say yes, just say yes. And sometimes you don't know what that yes is going to lead to. So yeah, I did get to go work for Andy's organization and then got the opportunity to work directly for Andy. And I think a lot of that is just, you never know when the gun's going to go off that you get a chance to sprint. And so if you've not been preparing for that moment, you won't be prepared. But if you've been preparing, you just never know what door might open. And same thing working with Pat is, got an opportunity. You never know. I was in a hotel room visiting a city with a friend, And he said, let's get on Zoom with Pat. And he just pulled up his phone and right there. And it's like, if you're not ready, you're not going to be ready. So I'm not sure that I was like, ready is not even quite the wrong word. The question is, are you preparing so that when the moment comes up, you're ready when that gun goes off? Well, I'd love to hear you respond to that. What do you think about that, Christian?
Yeah, I love that. I think first off, going back to your initial response of saying you wanted to go back to school, I think that's really encouraging for me and people my age, viewing your job as a schooling opportunity. Because I think in your 20s or coming fresh out of college, like the odds of you having your dream job are very low. And I think that discourages a lot of young professionals. They graduate and they think, sweet, I'm in the real world now. I'm going to go use my degree. I'm going to love going to work every day. And then the reality kind of hits them where it's like, okay, I don't necessarily love my day to day here, but if you look at it from a different perspective and say, what all am I learning here? And how am I building my skill sets and adding more to what I can give in the future? I think that's a great way to approach work. And then in terms of being ready for the opportunity, it's approaching work like that, saying like, okay, I'm going to buckle down and work hard with where I'm at, but I'm not going to be afraid to leave this when it's time to leave. And
totally,
I think there's a balance in choosing the safe option and saying, okay, I know what this is like now. Why change things up? I'm just going to keep doing this. And then also knowing, okay, this is a time in my life where I need to buckle down and just grind. So yeah, I think working hard where you're at while keeping your eyes open and being ready for that next opportunity, like that's a great advice.
I want to draw attention to one distinction, which is sometimes our mindset is, oh, I do just need to work hard. And I think especially when you're in your 20s and 30s, I'd pay attention to what interests you. Like, what is the thing that you're naturally curious about that you find interesting at work? And pay attention to that, because that's a clue about what you'll do in your season of influence, which is coming later in life. And yeah, you should learn how to work hard, of course, but also learn like what is the thing about work, about your job that's really intriguing. Like one way to think about this is the thought experiment of why is it that there are so many kids that are interested in dinosaurs, but there are so few paleontologists? Well, I think that an interest in dinosaurs, well, let's see if this metaphor actually plays out, in a kid can lead to a career in biology, in history. It could lead to a career in paleontology. It could lead to pattern recognition, organizing. It could lead to working with people. Like you could be working at Home Depot, and that could lead to a career doing construction or career with people or career in finance. And I just think paying attention to that requires you being fully present in that job, fully present in what you're doing, even more than it requires, quote, hard work. And I think that that's important to distinguish between if I had to pick between somebody being fully present in what they're doing and sweating at what they're doing, I would pick the fully present, because a fully present person will be a great worker and will becoming more aware of what's interesting, intriguing, and what problems they want to solve long term. Okay, Richard, I've never run any of these ideas by you. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think that presence and curiosity are critical components to being successful and being prepared. All the sweating that we do leading up to when we need to go do the sprint is actually what allows us to do the sprint. And sometimes you show up and the sprint is exactly what you thought it was going to be, but most times it's not. Matter of fact, rarely is when I have to show up, is it exactly what I prepared myself for. So we read all that we read, we learn all that we learn, not because we're going to necessarily use that knowledge, but because we're going to use what got us that knowledge, our ability to react and act. And, I think that there's some wisdom in this. I also think that what you're saying makes me think also about the young people I interact with who I think give up too soon. They're pushing a ball up a hill, and they give up, and they were like 10 feet from that ball being able to go over the hill. And, a lot of times when I'm coaching young people, I'm helping them see, like, have you squeezed all the life out of this opportunity that needs to be squeezed, both for you and for the organization, for you and those that you're serving. And I think sometimes because it doesn't look like what I want it to look like, I forget that my job here is to learn, it's to grow, it's to improve.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to kind of bring it back to talking about Andy and Pat, and just I'm really curious, with you working so closely with both of them, like what are some habits and things that they do in their lifestyles that have gotten to them to the places that they are and the level of influence that they have?
Okay, I have a lot to say about this. Andy and Pat have a lot in common. And because I've spent some time around them, then I got to spend time around other influential, successful people. And boy, I did this on the last time I was on this episode. I thought for a second, should I play it safe or should I tell the truth? So I will tell the truth, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about it. The truth is, they love work. They love what they do. And in fact, Pat and Andy are both two of the most curious people that I've ever met, that they have in many ways reached the top, and they are as hungry to learn as they've ever been. And sometimes, Christian, the way that can show up for really successful leaders like Nick Saban, Dave Ramsey, Pat Lencioni, Andy Stanley, is it can kind of look like they're control freaks, because they care really, 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 really deeply about their craft. And they've spent thousands and thousands of hours perfecting it. And if you care really, really deeply about what you do, to somebody who cares a medium amount, that can feel like, gosh, they are really controlling. Like they're kind of perfectionistic, but they just want excellence. Excellence always makes room for itself. There's always room in the world for somebody to do something with excellence. And these guys love what they do. And, you know, sometimes it's easy when you work for them to kind of poke fun at that of, wow, wouldn't it be nice if they had a hobby? Because then they would work a little less and we wouldn't have to work so much. But they've just found the thing that they really, really love to do. That's one observation. I have two more, but I'd love to pause and hear your response to that.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I think with anybody that does what they do at a really high level, like I noticed that with, I mean, particularly like for me in my sport of running, like the people that are the best are, it consumes them, but there's a difference between like healthy consumption and unhealthy, you know, it's like, it's like healthy obsession, I guess. And I think that's a big, like, that's hard for people who are really driven and really crave success, is where do you draw that line of, okay, in order to be really good at this, like in order, like to use my running example, like in order to race my best, I have to get the right amount of sleep. I have to eat the right things. I have to do the right things to my body throughout the week. Training has to go perfect. And like, sometimes if I obsess too much about that, it takes such a mental toll on me that then it's a paradox, and it ends up having a negative effect. So what would you say, I guess, to bounce it back to you, like when do you see, like what's the difference between healthy and unhealthy obsession with guys like that?
Well, I think for both of these guys, their ambition is not rooted in their success. Their ambition is what they want to bring to the world. And what I'd probably say, Christian, is sometimes the way you find the line is to cross the line. And so it might mean that, yeah, you might have to have a few weeks of burning the midnight oil to figure out that that's the line that you crossed. You might have to have some hard conversations with your, you know, girlfriend or spouse or roommate or parents about like, hey, why are you working so hard at this? So, and that might sound sort of hurtful or intimidating, but I just think sometimes you have to cross the line to find it, to discover what is healthy. And you know, I'm a runner, not nearly like you are. And I was asking a running coach at one point, like, how do I break past this mile time that I want to go? But he said, well, Beau, the only way to run faster is to run faster. And, you know, that's not necessarily worth writing down, but it does apply to almost everything in life of, well, if you want to be able to do more, you might just have to do more. like you're probably not going to become exceptional at something by doing the average of what everybody else does. So I do think there is a potential wound that people have that can make them want to get applause or want to get like, look at me, or want to be famous. But there's nothing wrong with wanting to contribute to the world. The danger is in wanting, and let me say it this way. There's no danger in wanting to be the best that you can be. You start to get into a little danger when you want to be better than somebody else. A friend of mine used to say it this way. There's no danger in wanting to be beautiful. There is danger in wanting to be the most beautiful. There's no danger in wanting to have the best the best created ideas to make them as simple and applicable as possible. And he has in many ways like an obsession with that, of making it so helpful and clear for somebody. There's no danger in that. The danger for him would be if he wants to put somebody else down to get on top of them. So that's a thought. I think related to that is my second observation about people who are at this part of their craft, who are really, really good at what they do, is they have a very difficult time getting people to tell them the truth. Mm-hmm. People who are successful, I see this everywhere. It is very hard for them to surround themselves with people who want to tell them the truth. And that happens for a couple reasons. One, when the famous person's status gets elevated, the people around them get elevated too, and you want to protect that status of being close to that person. And the second thing is that happens to every leader is you start to think that your poops don't stink and that your jokes are a lot funnier than they are. And I noticed that pattern. I'm sure the same thing is true of athletes, of professional athletes. It's true of people in business. It's true of people in ministry, that the more successful you are, perhaps the paradox of that is it's harder and harder for people to be willing to be a mirror to you, and for you even to get the truth about the organization that you lead. Richard's nodding his head. What do you think about that, Richard?
I wondered, Beau, if those two aren't connected. You know, the thing that I think about is every shadow to a good thing is bad. There's always a dark side to every good thing. So, elevating your influence and your impact creates this people not wanting to tell the truth. And on your first point, I was thinking, let me tie the two. I think that sometimes what happens is, one, I don't want people to tell me the truth because it's going to affect my ability to have influence. And I wonder if the line doesn't have to be about my identity. When my identity is connected to my obsession, if I'm defined by that, so only when I have the best book, Pat's launching a new book. Mm-hmm. And when this thing comes out, it will be a New York Times bestseller because it's Pat Lencioni. But is the book itself really have that value and have that insight? Likely it does. But if it doesn't, and it isn't well received, is he like, well, okay, let's move on? Or, Andy has some, whatever the celebrity is, has something and it defines who they are. I think that's a place where people aren't willing to hear the truth is when there's a bit of their identity is tied to their progress, because people who their identity isn't tied to that, they want to know the difficult thing. And we've all known leaders, famous leaders or unfamous leaders, where the first thing when they're done, hey, give me some feedback. I want to know, what could have I done better? How did that go? How was that received? What did it look like on the other side of me? And then you've had others where you go and offer that without being asked. And it's not only not well received, it is you're tormented because of that. And in my career, I've seen that many, many times.
Andy used to say, you're ready. And in his context, it was to give a sermon, but this could apply to somebody giving a speech or writing a book or leading a staff meeting. You're ready when you care more about the people who are going to hear it than you care about their reaction to it. Mm-hmm. You care more about the people in the room than you care about whether or not they're going to like you. That's how you know that you're ready. When your heart breaks more for them, for the thing that you're there to contribute to the world, than it breaks for, their applause or laughter or that was a really good job. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's a great barometer for me of what would be the thing that would bother me the most that this didn't promote dignity of people, that's our mission at the Table Group, is to promote human dignity, or would it bother me more that it wasn't a bestseller? Okay, let's really wrestle that to the ground together and be vulnerable and honest about that, and now we can move forward. I want to tell you my third observation about them because it will be interesting to hear your response to this. So, observation 1, they love work. In fact, it can be seen that they're a bit of a control freak or obsessive about it. Observation 2, it's hard to get people to tell them the truth. And the third one is that at some point in their life, people tried to round them out. And I'm sort of working some of these ideas out live with you guys. But I see people chasing like a balanced life, and I see really successful people have an integrated life. And what I mean by that, of like when they say they want to round them out, it's like, well, Andy, you're one of the best communicators in the world, but you're not super great at volunteer trainings, so we need to get you better at volunteer trainings. Or Pat, you're unlike anybody ever at unearthing new models, but you're not really good at data. We should get you better at data. We should include more data in your books. And I see this especially in young leaders, a temptation to be well-rounded. And sometimes, like, being well-rounded in many ways is good. Like, we should be healthy and we should exercise and we should have relationships. And less well-rounded is an excuse to be less of yourself. And so often I think we're telling people, oh, you should have balance. And what we're actually saying is, hey, simmer down there on your strengths because they don't make us feel very good. And we want to kind of work on your weaknesses. And I want to yell at the top of my lungs about that. Quit trying to improve on your weaknesses. The best impact you can make on the world is standing taller on your strengths and fully maximizing what you can bring to the world, not improving on your already marginally below average weaknesses. If you're looking at Bill Belichick and saying, you know what, you're not a very good caretaker of the people on the team, I'd say, yeah, he should hire somebody who's really good at that. And he should keep being really, really good at the thing that he's doing. So I'm all about liberal arts education. I'm all about like exploring and doing lots of things, but be more of yourself, not less of yourself. Okay, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's really good. So I started like binging the Working Genius podcast a couple weeks ago, and it's got me thinking about that. Because when I first listened to like the first episode where Pat was explaining like what all the working geniuses are, I was unfamiliar with it. And I assumed that you would take the assessment, find out your strengths so that you can work on your weaknesses. Mm-hmm. And like the whole thing would be modeled around like, all right, these are your two, frustrations, right? Working frustrations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was kind of ready for this approach of like, okay, then we're going to give you tools of how to work on your frustrations. But I was like pleasantly surprised to hear, no, the point of knowing your working geniuses are so that you can work in those and thrive in those. And yeah, I think that says a lot. And it says a lot too about how like people around these leaders want them to be like well-rounded, and how that can like cause frustration when it doesn't feel like you're good at everything. But the reality is, if you're someone who's good at 2 and you're trying really hard to be good at 6, then you're going to be okay at like all 6.
That's right. Totally agree.
It breeds complacity. It breeds average. It makes everyone average. And what it does is it makes it life easier for people. But we're trying to accomplish great things. We're not trying to make things easier. And so we've got to take literally the thing that I love about Working Genius is like, what is that genius? And oftentimes our genius, it has a dark side. And when people operate in that one, you got to be aware of the dark side. You know, I think it's important to know what are your derailers and what's going to keep you from using your genius rather than try and get your derailers into a strength.
That's really good. Yeah, I want to use in the world of Working Genius, I want to use my inventing and my galvanizing to serve the world. And then I want to be aware that sometimes that overdone strength has an impact on people, and be aware of that, but also not wear that as a handcuff. Like I'm not gonna let the thing that breaks my heart be the fact that you don't like me. I hope that my heart breaks for something a lot bigger than the fact that I might offend you once in a while. Like, does that make sense? Like, I want in my office to like have a champion phrase of like, this is what I am doing out in the world, which for us right now is promote human dignity and truth. And it's not make sure that I never upset anybody or make sure that everybody likes me. But Richard, like the averaging out and softening is so often from a place of fear or worry of that I'm not going to be accepted, and not a courage to say, maybe I could actually do something significant. Now, significant doesn't always mean big. It certainly doesn't mean famous. Significant can mean deep-rooted investment in one particular place with a small group of people in a particular location. But go do it. Go give them all of who you are. And to tie back to the earlier part of our conversation, keep sharpening the saw. Because if you believe you have a role to play, you want to do that as well as you can for the people around you.
Yeah, that's really good. Do you have anything else to say about that, Dad?
No, I think Beau's literally has put a bow on it. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So I want to kind of shift the conversation a little bit here. So I love consuming content from guys like Andy and Pat and other leaders like that. I love listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos, checking in on their Instagrams, things like that. And I think a lot of people my age do. And that's something that's very new to my generation, is all this access to content. And like one thing I've heard before is people say like, you want to have really influential mentors in your life. Well, with the internet, you have the power to be mentored by whoever you want. Go consume their content. And so there's a lot of benefits to that. And every time I listen to a podcast like The Working Genius or something, I feel motivated, I feel productive. I'm fired up after listening. It kind of serves as like this dopamine rush of like, oh, I just accomplished something by listening to that. And I think that sometimes there's too much consumption with people my age, and it makes them feel so satisfied by consuming it that then, I'll listen to the podcast, then I'll put it away and go about my day and not do anything about it. So do you think that that can be a problem for young professionals to have this much access to information that it prevents them from actually taking action?
You told me you were going to ask this question, and I put in my notes, I have no idea. So I really don't know, but here's a few thoughts about it. Number one, influencers are not real. Somebody who is famous and has podcasts and Instagram following and a TikTok, whatever, it's not the same thing as somebody being real. Therefore, you listening to that person might not be making any real difference in your life. You could listen to 17 podcasts about how to wash the dishes and there still be dirty dishes in the sink, right? You could watch a masterclass on how to mow the lawn when you just should probably go mow the lawn. So now this is part of my personality and wiring. I'm very nervous about influencers because I think it's sort of vapor. It's kind of mist. I'm not sure that it's actually real or making any real significant difference in the world. So if I were to curate a list of what you should be going and listening to and pursuing, I would probably start by saying you should go read the stories of people that you know had influence, not necessarily follow the people who can tweet about influence. And here's what I mean about that. And I know that it sounds like work, but I would go read Shoe Dog, which is about Phil Knight, or American Icon, which is about Alan Mulally and turning around the Ford Motor Company. I would go read books by Doris Kearns Goodwin, who talks about presidential leadership, and Undaunted Courage, which is about the leadership of Lewis and Clark and Sacagawea. And like, why not go read the stories of people who actually had impact? And part of this, Christian, is when the world is zigging, I often want to zag, is a lot of the things that sound like they're true on the internet, and they sound like they're pretty good. You go watch and read the stories of people who actually made a difference, and they didn't have big, hairy, audacious goals. They didn't have life mission statements. They didn't know their Enneagram number. They didn't have a branding guide. Okay. Like they just, but you'll catch something by reading the stories of people who actually did something that you can't get by hearing people talk about it. So that's thought number one. And I have a thought number two. But push back. I absolutely, I mean, I even started this, I don't know, but that's my first observation.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. I think thinking about that, I think maybe the reason why people my age would rather just listen to a 20 to 30 minute podcast that kind of gives them like quick, this is what you need to do, is takes less effort than reading Shoe Dog and thinking and having to decipher it and look like, what did Phil Knight do that made him so successful? Like it's a entertaining story, like one of my favorite books I've ever read. But when I was reading it, I wasn't necessarily reading it in the same way that I would be listening to a Pat Lencioni podcast, you know, like when I'm doing that, it's like, okay, I want to kind of take notes, figure out how is my life going to change after this. When I'm reading Shoe Dog, it's a little more for entertainment, but like consuming those life stories as a way to, in the same way that I would listen to a podcast, I think is great advice.
Yeah. Another example of that would be, and I don't know if these are even still a big deal. It seems like they kind of are, is conferences. A bunch of years ago, and Richard, I know you speak at conferences. The Table Group goes and speaks at conferences. So I'm not necessarily anti-conference, but maybe I am a little anti-conference. I kept hearing people come back from conference sessions with all these ideas, and it never changed anything. And I thought, well, instead of going to a conference and spending $1,500 on the conference, I'm just going to email one person, and I've done this, and said, can I just come to your meetings for a day and just come, and I'll just buy a plane ticket and go. So I've done this several times where instead of going to XYZ conference, I'll just think that speaker is kind of the reason I'm going. I'm just going to reach out to them and see if I can go follow them around for a day. And I learned way more actually watching the way they actually live and lead and what their meetings are like than I ever would from hearing a keynote about it. Now, I get there's some value in the networking and the being inspired thing, but for me, I'm so nervous about hearing something and not doing anything with it that I would rather just go put all my eggs in the basket of, well, I guess I might as well go try it and follow them around. And worst case scenario is, well, I don't even know what the worst case scenario is.
Yeah. Well, my light bulb triggers are just like going off like crazy. Okay, so I'm a professional conference goer. I do a lot of this, but the value of a conference is not the stage. The value of the conference is the hallways. Period. End of sentence. Hard stop. And so when conferences started going virtual, you lost the only value of them, because I don't need to go to the conference to hear the content. I can go pull my phone up. I can go to the library. Right. I can go on the internet. Everything I'm going to get from the stage is right there. The only reason I'm doing this is because I need to meet a Beau Johnson I'd never met before. That's number one. Number two, in this context, that's the problem with consuming all of this information and all the influencers is it's missing the hallways. And I think if we go back to the very first thing you said, the reason why you took this job was to go to school. It's because there's a bias for action to do something. And there's a missing link in all of this. I don't think that Christian binging or you binging or me binging on a whole bunch of content is bad. I don't even think following influencers are bad. I think absence of a bias for action, that's what makes it bad, because now what you're doing is you're getting bloated. And the world doesn't need more bloated people. We got plenty of people that are bloated to death. What we need is to pour that out, have a bias for action, take somewhere, somehow, something. And that's our goal here, is to create a community where we can have some hallway interactions rather than just gather more and more and more information.
That is such a neat connecting of the dots to me of, yes, it is that's what happens when you just show up, is you meet other show up kind of people. You meet other people who are hungry And, if I were to say something else about influencers, Christian, is if you go start a hustle, if you go start a business, you decide to like give it your all for a year in the work you're already doing, you'll quickly discover which influences are helpful and which are just interesting theoretical. And so, if you're exercising, you tend to crave better food. If you want to sleep better and you want to drink less alcohol and drink less caffeine, like just start working out and it will happen almost naturally because your body will crave it. Your mind is going to crave people who are really helpful if you're out there just trying stuff and doing it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think like take action before you're consuming the content, I think is what I'm hearing there. Like if you have an idea, just go for it, do it. Don't be worried about having all the answers right away. Because if you're doing something, you're going to start to naturally filter out what you don't need to be hearing. Yeah, that's gold.
I will give a bit of permission here that this might be helpful for people. Is my observation is that people move through 4 seasons of life. And there is a different purpose for content and conferences and relationships and all of that in each of the different seasons. So the 4 seasons of life, the first is identity. You figure out who you are, you figure out your story, you figure out your family, you know who you are. And then next season of life is exploration, where you are out there widely pursuing interests in as many different things as sound intriguing to you. And the secret with exploration is to go wide and deep. It's to pick authors that you listen to, read everything that they write, but also read some stuff that scares you. Like follow some people and listen to everything they say, and then find some people who do totally different things. Like exploration is all about putting yourself in an environment where you're going to be able to connect the dots later of what really like stirred you up. Identity. If you skip identity and go right to exploration, you're going to end up lost. Because if you don't know who you are, you don't know whose you are, you don't know what matters to you, then you're going to be in a season of exploration and end up just chasing other people. And I love that bumper sticker that says, not all who wander are lost, but I want to have one that says, not all who wander are lost, but some are, because some are people who are out there wandering are actually lost. Okay.
Yeah.
Identity, exploration, and then you have a season of influence. And a season of influence is when you have done the right exploring to figure out what is the specific thing that I can contribute to the world, which is what I've been talking about in this episode, in the last episode. But you can't get to the season of influence unless you've had the season of exploration. And the thing that makes me so nervous about influencers is that people listening to them think that the goal is to be them. And you don't just get to skip a step. You first go through the season of exploration and go all in deep and hustle. And don't side hustle, but say, I'm going to take 2 years of my life and give it my all. And I forget who it was that said, hey, if you give 100% for a year, it probably is going to feed you for 10 years. Like just going all in on something. Okay. And then after the season of influence is the season of multiplication, where you find other people who are around you that you're able to empty your cup to them. So I think content is fantastic and serves different purposes in each phase. And to your point, Christian and Richard, there's probably a temptation to be somewhat gluttonous with content in the exploration phase, which is why I'm like, it's all about the verbs. It's all about getting out there, exploring, trying, wrestling, experimenting, and then looking your uncle in the face when at Thanksgiving, they're like, well, do you have a job with benefits? And you're like, oh, that's how big your life ambition is for me to have a job with benefits? And say like, no, I'm out there trying to explore and figure out what is the difference I want to make in the world. I'm not just out there trying to find the job that's going to help me play it safe. No offense to who's ever uncle is listening, but it's so frustrating to me how many parents are putting pressure on their kids to be like, you really got to think about retirement. And I'm like, really? At 26, the most important thing for them is to be worrying about retirement? How about they be worrying about making sure that these next few laps around the track, that they're fully maximizing them so they can make an impact? Because I believe that they can. I just believe it goes in order. Boy, you guys, I really stand on these soapboxes and rant.
No,
No,
it's
I
so
love
good.
it.
And
Smoothie.
well, and I want to throw my question back to Christian. You know, I've never lived a day of my life where I didn't want influence. I remember it from a young age. I remember being 7 years old thinking I want to do this differently. So this isn't just a young person's thing, but it seems like today, Christian, a lot of young people want to jump immediately to the top of Kilimanjaro. They want to jump immediately to influence. They want to, and that's not necessarily fame. It's, you know, sometimes it's some good things. What do you think keeps them from going through identity and exploration phase? Why are young professionals today afraid of that? Do you have any insight?
I think it's because it looks easy today. It looks easier than probably it did for you guys. I think especially with TikTok, Instagram, things like that, like it's pretty easy to put out one thing and all of a sudden you're considered an influencer or you have all these followers. And so I think people think that it can come so easy and all you got to do is get lucky. And so they're craving that. And they see people who were like, oh, a year ago, nobody knew who I was. And now look at me now. And they think I can do that too. And so I think it's that and pressure in that way, not realizing that the identity and exploration is necessary.
Beau, do you have thoughts?
That's a good word. It looks. I mean, I think the identity one is the hardest one, and it's where when you're trying to figure out who you are, like the hardest person in the world to know is yourself. And I would just say for me, I found such terrific peace in knowing that I'm not the first person who's thought of that, and that there's a God who loves me and has named me. And the goal of identity isn't for me to try to chase more. It's to figure out what he's already said about who I am. And that's helpful for me to be grounded in that and allows me to do the I actually think I'm still in the season of exploration myself. Allows me to do the exploration with less pressure.
Yeah, that's really good. I think it's just the hustle culture in general. I think puts a lot of pressure on people my age to skip past that identity and kind of just pressure from their peers, pressure from people they look up to that they need to have influence right now. And I think that goes into more like, I wanted to ask you, talking about content and stuff like this. You've worked with like being a pastor and working in higher education. Like you've been around a lot of young professionals over the last decade plus. And that's kind of where we've seen social media like really take off. And so, I mean, off the top of your head, what are some other problems you see with social media and young professionals, like aside from over consuming content?
You know, I said this to you guys on the last episode that you can't make old friends. And I think that the danger of social media is, of course, that it's filtered parts of our day and filtered parts of our life. And it might accidentally communicate that that's all of our life. And I don't know that this is new with the social media culture, but it's certainly true that it might make it harder. It might make it easier to connect on a shallow level and harder to connect on a real deep level. And, you know, it goes back to that thing I said of I watch people who are very successful, and I'm not saying it's impossible. In fact, I'm very close to Pat Lencioni, and I watch him fight to be able to make sure he still has really close relationships. And I love that about him is, if you only live in that 2-dimensional space, do you ever have permission to not be okay? Do you ever have permission to be silent, to just play together, to not have to have it be a moment or to have it be worthy of a reel or a story? So there's lots of people who've talked about that, and I'm certainly not original to have that concern. But a lot of what I think propels and carries you into your 30s and 40s and 50s is the quality of your relationships, not the quantity of the people connected to you. And I'm sad every time I walk by a restaurant booth and everybody's sitting there on their phone. Because just like in the hallway, Richard, there's some stuff that you just can't get talking through a screen.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the addictive natures of social media is naturally comparison, and comparison is a thief of
Mm-hmm.
joy. And when we're comparing ourselves, it's like, it's not a problem to be handsome or beautiful. It's a problem to want to be not just the most, but to be more handsome or beautiful than someone else. And when you find, when you see how unhandsome or beautiful you are because you're looking and comparing yourself to someone else, I have one person to compare myself to, and that is the person who is made in the image of God in one unique life. And that's my job. That's my responsibility. And that's my indicator. That's, who I am and whose I am, and everything else around that, the whole world. And much of social media is trying to take that truth away. So not that it's bad, but I think when you fall into that pit of comparison, it just does way more negative than good.
It also, the default of all social media is more. And that's true two ways. One, that the algorithms and all that are going to put you higher in people's feeds the more engaged you are. And that feed is an appetite that's never fully satisfied, right? You just keep scrolling, but you also just keep posting. So, Rich, Christian, you'd asked me this question: what's one thing that somebody could do today to apply what we've been learning, or like what's one takeaway? And I thought, oh, it might be this: that you would run hard and walk slow. That you would like go hard to the paint, like believe that you can do more in the next 10 years than you thought possible. And then when it's time to rest, walk slow, and walk slow in relationships, walk beside people. When it's time to rest, actually rest, don't veg. And that's something I actually have 9 rules for life. And that's one of them my first one is to walk slowly. I don't have to work on the running hard part. I have to remind myself to walk slowly. And does that connect with you at all?
Yeah, that does. That's so good. Reminds me of, I read the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and yeah, it reminds me of that whole concept of how important it is to just slow down and be present in life. So yeah, well, this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you for coming back on. I'm sure we'll be having you again soon.
Enjoyed it, guys. Thank you.